All right, let's introduce our guest. Joining us from Washington, D.C., Alan Makovsky, a senior policy analyst and former staff member of the U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee. From Baku, Ahmad Shahidov, a political analyst and regional affairs commentator and expert on the Caucasus region. And from Turkey, Barin Kayaoglu, an academic and international relations commentator. A very warm welcome to all three of you gentlemen. Welcome to Inside Story. Barin, let me start with you, because this is President Erdogan's first trip to the White House, as we said, in many years, following a cooling of relations between Turkiye and the US during the Biden administration. Before we get into the substance of this visit, what does the meeting of these two strongmen politicians now say to you, Barin?
First of all, thank you for having me on the program. What this meeting tells us is that, and including the meeting that took place, I believe it was before the two presidents met with the leaders of the Arab and Muslim countries, where both leaders sat at the head of the table. I think that's more of an architecture issue, but it also sent a signal that the president of the United States, when it comes to regional affairs, considers the president of Turkey something as a co-equal, and that to a large extent, especially in pressing issues such as Syria, the United States and Turkey will be cooperating, and personally, at a personal report, because of the chemistry between Presidents Trump and Erdogan, that they're going to at least conduct a lot of their business directly. In terms of the image, in terms of the optics, of course, you're absolutely right. This is the first time that President Erdogan has been invited to the White House, and he likes to resolve these sorts of outstanding issues by leader-to-leader diplomacy, and that has its strengths and weaknesses, but that's how both presidents like to do business. So in that respect, we, as your reporter, Mr. Axel Zaimovic said, we can expect some progress, but it's not going to happen overnight. That must be said.
The two men could be co-equals, says Barin. Alan, let's turn to you. Is it fair to say that Trump and Erdogan govern with similar political instincts, Alan?
Instincts, I think that's a good word. Yes, I think that's very fair. I would say that Mr. Erdogan is stronger within his society because institutions in Turkey are weaker, and Erdogan has been in power since 2003, effectively since 2002, actually. Yes, neither of them, I think, like the niceties of democratic politics. And Mr. Erdogan is certainly trying to run roughshod, in fact, disembowel his leading opponents, the secular Republican People's Party, through numerous arrests, including the arrests of the elected mayor of Istanbul, who was seen as Erdogan's leading opponent and likely successful opponent in the next presidential election.
I turn to you, Ahmad. Alan seems to suggest that the reason why this meeting has happened at all is because the Trump administration seems to be less bothered about allegations of democratic backsliding by the Erdogan leadership than under the Biden administration. To you, Ahmad, I mean, how does this deepening of the economic and diplomatic ties between the two countries, you think, serve the America First agenda of Donald Trump and indeed the ambitions of the region too?
Of course, thank you for having me in your program. The meeting in Washington has shown that when the United States of America and Turkey talk directly and reduce tensions, the whole region breathes easier. From the South Caucasus, of course, as Azerbaijan, we immediately feel whether Ankara and Washington are aligned or drifting apart, because Turkey is not only a NATO member, but also a country with deep cultural, political, and economic ties in this geography. And the United States remains the only actor with the leverage to either calm conflicts or allow them to escalate. Now, after this Trump-Erdogan meeting, we see signs that both sides are trying to reset and put more focus on practical cooperation in different regions, in Middle East, in Syria, even in Ukraine or Russian war, and security, trade, and military coordination between these two countries are on the agenda. And if this trend continues, it will strengthen stability in our neighborhood in South Caucasus as well, because Washington and Ankara are on the same page, and it sends a clear message to other actors, to Russia, Iran, even to EU, that the South Caucasus is not an open field for power games. From Azerbaijan perspective, if this dialogue fails, then that vacuum will once again be exploited and making our region more fragile.
Right.
So we highly welcome the meeting of Trump and Erdogan at White House, and we estimate this meeting very fruitful.
Understood. So, Ahmad, you believe that this will bring stability, security, prosperity, not just to Turkey and the United States, but the entire region. Barin, let's look into the details here, because trade between Turkey and the US exceeded $35 billion last year. It's expected to rise to $40 billion this year. That's according to the Turkish government. Among the latest deals, plan to purchase 250 Boeing jets from the US. We know, though, Barin, that the Turkish economy has struggled a huge amount recently, with soaring inflation, the plummeting value of the lira. So who benefits from this new deepening in diplomatic and economic ties? Is it the US or is it Turkey, or both simultaneously?
I would say both, but if you were to press me, I would say still Turkey in terms of the bilateral trade, because when you also factor in the not only trade in goods but also services, not only does Turkey-US trade go up, exceed $40 billion. That's according to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. That's an 8+% increase from 2023 through 2024. But there is actually a small, not as significant, but a small surplus to Turkey's advantage. And President Trump has made it very clear for a while that he's not very happy whenever Turkey gets a little bit ahead in the bilateral trade. That being said, it was also during his first administration that he and President Trump, and President Erdogan committed their countries to raising their bilateral trade, and in both goods and services, to $100 billion. So there's a lot of ambition on that front. With respect to, if I may very quickly, the Boeings, those were already written into Turkish Airlines, the national carrier, Turkish Airlines' strategic plans, that roughly 50 to 60% of them would be purchased from Airbus and the remainder from Boeing. So there's actually not a whole lot that's new there. It's just the modalities of how Turkey will acquire those aircraft from Boeing.
All right, thanks for clarifying that regarding the Boeing deal, Barin. Alan, I note that ahead of the meeting at the White House, Turkey abandoned some retaliatory tariffs imposed on the US in 2018 following a diplomatic row over the arrest of an American pastor. Might the US be willing to lift the 15% tariff that was slapped upon Turkey? It is less than other regional peers, but nevertheless, it's there, Alan.
Yeah, as you said, it's less than was put on many EU states. I'm not sure. It's not relative to other tariffs that Trump has imposed, it's not a huge amount. And I think talking to U.S. officials, there's a feeling that the Turkish tariffs really were unfair and that they really did want to see more balance. So I'm not sure. It could happen, but it didn't seem to be a primary ask of Erdogan's. If the U.S. wants to make a goodwill gesture, it might reduce it 5% and go back to the 10% that it was before August.
Right, we'll look out for any gestures of goodwill then. Alan, I wonder if I can stay with you, because it's impossible, of course, to separate the geopolitical interests that underpin all of this. All of these trade promises, let's call it that. Again, President Trump is placing pressure on NATO partner Turkey and others to halt the purchase of Russian oil. Now, here's the rub, though, isn't it, Alan? Because Turkey ranks among the largest buyers of Russian crude, even while supplying Ukraine drones and artillery shells. Very briefly, Alan, can you explain why is that?
Well, first of all, Russia is right across the Black Sea from Turkey, so there's a certain convenience factor there. But more importantly, Turkey has always tried to balance its relations with Russia with those of the West. And particularly during this war, it has tried to play it down the middle, helping Ukraine, as you said, by selling drones, and supporting it rhetorically, but at the same time, continuing to purchase hydrocarbons, both gas and oil, from Russia. And you'll notice that President Trump sort of chided Erdogan at yesterday's meeting by calling him neutral, implying that he shouldn't be neutral between Russia and Ukraine. So this is a geostrategic decision on Turkey's part to try to get along with its powerful neighbor, Russia. Now, there is an interesting development that, as was mentioned in the setup piece, and as Barin mentioned, that Turkey has now signed a deal for a major purchase of LNG from the U.S. It has been increasing its purchases from the U.S., and it's a significant part of the gas that it buys from Russia. Right. 40% of all its gas it buys from Russia, but a significant part of that that contract will end this year.
Okay, let's build on what you said there, because it doesn't stop there, because Russia's also building Turkey's first nuclear power plant, while simultaneously inviting smaller US companies to invest in these small modular reactors, all while ramping up, as you say, Alan, imports of American seaborne liquefied natural gas. Barin, this sounds like a win-win situation to be in for Ankara, isn't it, Barin?
That's absolutely true. And to quickly add to what Alan was saying a moment ago, many of the contracts between Turkey and Russia for hydrocarbons were actually negotiated long-term and all the way back in the 1990s. And it's usually in periods now of at least 5 to 10 years, if not longer, where they're negotiated. And this is a problem in different regards too. Our brotherly country of Azerbaijan also occasionally used to sell gas and oil to Israel, which, as you know, is not exactly President Erdogan's favorite country. So the short answer to that is basically it's not personal, it's strictly business. But beyond that, Turkey is also looking at different avenues and to diversify not only its supply of hydrocarbon, but also various forms of other energy sources, including some domestic sources. A couple of years ago, there was a big find in the Black Sea. In the Black Sea seabed, which is now being extracted, although because it's fairly deep, it has taken a while to fully exploit that. And down the road, that natural gas coming from within Turkey's exclusive economic zone in the Black Sea is going to contribute as much as 15%, perhaps even 20% by the 2030s of Turkey's natural gas needs.
Ahmed, I mean, what happens obviously in Turkey, as we've just been hearing there, inevitably benefits the entire region. Turkey's existing infrastructure, as Barin said, includes the Trans-Anatolian natural gas pipeline, already playing a pivotal role in delivering Azeri natural gas to Europe. When it comes to regional prosperity, Ahmed, can Turkey afford to choose between the US and Russia briefly?
Of course, I believe that the energy issue was one of the important part of this meeting. And from Azerbaijan perspective, the Southern Gas Corridor, which delivers Caspian resources to Europe through Turkey, depends not only on infrastructure but also on political support. And the United States has long backed this project, and Turkey is its essential transit hub. If Trump and Erdogan manage to build a more constructive relationship, that political cover becomes stronger, giving the entire project more credibility and resilience. And for Europe, that means more reliable alternative to Russian energy. And for Azerbaijan, it means more security for our long-term role as energy supplier. And from this perspective, I estimate very constructive Trump-Erdogan meetings.
Understood. I'm keen to move on to the question of the S-35 jet deal, because, Alan, there's a very big dilemma, isn't there, faced by the US over whether or not to reinstate Turkiye into the F-35 fighter jet program. Just for our viewers and our listeners, Turkiye was expelled from buying the Russian S-400 missile defense system in 2019, which the US and NATO allies see as a threat, basically, to F-35 stealth technology. The S-400, now S-500, are presumed to be the only things that can really shoot down the F-35. Alan, what does it mean for a NATO member, Turkiye, to have both US and Russian hardware at its disposal, potentially?
Well, from the U.S. point of view, it doesn't mean anything good. The concern regarding the S-400 was that were it in proximity to the F-35, that it could pick up data from the F-35 and learn how the F-35 operates and pick up other information that the U.S. does not want it to have. And that was the original reason, as you suggested, that Turkey was expelled from the F-35 program. The F-35 is a fifth generation. It's considered the most advanced fighter jet in the world. Turkey was one of 8 countries that was co-producing it. They were expelled from the program because they purchased the S-400 air defense system, and they were forbidden to buy F-35s. They were planning to purchase 100 F-35s. And actually, Congress has passed legislation saying that Turkey cannot purchase any F-35s unless it gives up possession, unless it no longer possesses the S-400. So it must give it up, according to congressional law. Now, as you suggested in your first question, sometimes President Trump might be inclined to look to circumvent law. And this might be one of those instances we could discuss that. But as of right now, it's against U.S. law to sell F-35s to Turkey while they possess the S-400.
But Barin, do you think that Turkey is hoping that Donald Trump will quietly bend the rules and avoid any kind of congressional oversight when it comes to the sales, supply of F-35s?
As Alan mentioned, I think there, besides the NDA, the National Defense Authorization Act, there were also the CAATSA sanctions of 2019, to which Turkey was included in 2020. So it's a double-track issue, I believe. President Trump can grant a national security waiver for the CAATSA sanctions, but not so for the NDAA. I think the language there is pretty strong, as Alan mentioned. There are, of course, things that could be bracketed. 6 Turkish-owned F-35s they came off the assembly line, and they're sitting in a hangar somewhere in Texas. So these are Turkish-owned, and Turkey had already invested about somewhere between $1.8 to $1.8 billion. And so that money is somehow going to either come back to the Turkish treasury, or somehow the two sides are going to settle the scores. But if I may very briefly mention this, Turkey is already producing its own national integrated and multi-layered air defense system, Steel Dome. Once that comes into fruition, it is already doing so as we speak. The S-400 really is going to be an afterthought. And once Turkey's national fifth-generation fighter aircraft, Khan, enters into serial production, I'm looking forward to the day when we can use the S-400, if not as target practice, at least in some other way.
Right, so the S-400 might be redundant before they need it, potentially. Let's move on to Syria, because this is a crucially important thing to discuss. Barin, staying with you, both countries, Turkey and the United States, are also more aligned than ever when it comes to Syria. What underpins that shared vision for Syria, Barin? Briefly, if you may, as we reach the end of the show.
Happy to. Well, if you remember the mid-2010s with the rise of ISIS, basically availing itself of the opportunity of a weakening central state in Syria, of a weakening federal government, a central government in Baghdad, had created essentially a third country in those two countries. And we all remember the horrific images, which that then had triggered a massive influx of refugees from Syria into other parts of the region, but especially into Europe. And as someone who stands on the conservative side of the political spectrum, Donald Trump doesn't want to see that happen. As you know, in the United States, illegal undocumented immigration has also been one of his main planks in raising his political profile from the mid-2010s onward.
Ahmed, do you think Trump and Erdogan are eyeing regional economic opportunities linked to the reconstruction of Syria? As requested, a brief answer, if you may.
Of course, Turkey wants Syria to be developed and all sanctions to Syria to be lifted. And that's why Erdogan, from the first days after the getting Syria more independent, asked European countries, especially Western countries and United States, to lift these sanctions. And during the Erdogan-Trump meeting, the issue of Syria was discussed very broadly. But there are other regional players like Israel that still threatens the Syria's territorial integrity and sovereignty and attacks Syrian cities. It's the Red Cross for Turkey as well.
As we reach the end of the show, let me pick up that point that you made about Israel with Alan, because obviously, Alan, America is the main financial backer and military sponsor of Israel that's been carrying out strikes in Syria after the fall of Assad. Israel's foreign minister accused Turkiye of playing a negative role in Syria and threatened Ahmed al-Shara, the new president of Syria, that he would pay a very heavy price if he allowed hostile forces, i.e. Turkiye, to enter his country. I mean, how does the US navigate these tensions between Israel and Turkiye? Briefly, Alan.
Fortunately, the United States has good relations with both Israel and Turkey. And yes, it's a very dangerous situation. Both Israeli troops and Turkish troops are in Syria at opposite ends of the country. And the United States has worked with them on deconfliction, and I think they will have to, I think Washington will continue to have to exert efforts in that regard.
Lots of questions about the level of effort needed to be put in to bring countries that are ideologically opposed to any kind of agreement when it comes to the future of Syria. It's been a pleasure, gentlemen, to speak to all three of you. We've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. Hugely appreciated. Alan Makovsky, Barin Kayaoglu, Ahmad Shahidov, many thanks for joining us on Inside Story. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Neve Parker, and the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.